an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Ambassador's Mission. Chapters 22, 23, 24, and 25. A Reunion, New Helpers, The Allies You Need, and Messenger's News. In these chapters, mostly what I am really interested in is the fact that Cery has a daughter we never met. And she sounds like Sonea. Interesting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. It has been about 2 months since the last episode, so it has been a minute. And I didn't lose track of what was going on or anything like that, because I was a little bit worried when I began reading again, and I was like, am I going to run across stuff that I can't remember? But there was one thing, actually, now that I say that, there was one thing that I wasn't sure about, and that is this very thing, which is Cery's daughter. Did we know that he had a daughter that wasn't part of the family that had been killed? Because if we did know that, I completely forgot it. And I'm very interested in this. Like, I'm assuming, I think that we did hear that he had like a different wife, right? And we met her because she was still alive. Whereas the one that he wound up with, he had sons with, is the one who was killed. So maybe this girl is the daughter from that woman. But regardless, it doesn't really matter in the end. I'm just trying to piece together if any of the information I was given before has anything to do with this. But I have to admit that I'm very much here for Cery having like a woman in his group, even though she's very young and obviously is going to need training. It's made clear that she's like, a fast learner isn't exactly what I mean. She's a good learner, because people say that they're fast learners, and I always think fast is not an indicator of good quality understanding. You can know how to do a thing, but if you don't know when to do the thing or why to do the thing, knowing how to do the thing isn't actually the problem. And I like that it's mentioned later on that she is, making mistakes, but she's making them out of ignorance, not because she's a fool, not because she's reckless or rash. It's because she just doesn't know any better. And once they explain to her why what she's doing isn't a good call, she absorbs that and takes it to heart, and definitely seems to believe that they know what they're talking about, that they speak from experience. And that to me is the biggest thing, is you can be young and inexperienced, but understand that the people who are older than you know what, have more experience and know what they're talking about. There's just a kind of, there can be a lot of times in stories in general, not just fantasy, there can be a sort of treatment of the adults who are trying to teach somebody how to do something, that like they are old and stuck in their ways in a sense that makes them, like, puts them at a disadvantage. And I like that there's a bit of a joke ongoing about how old Cery is and Goal is, but it's done in fun and in a loving sort of way that feels like it comes from experience also. So anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I just wanted to mention that because, I'm very into this little subplot. So let's go back to Achadi and Daniel. I was really feeling that Achadi was gay. And, we don't know for sure. He may be bi. He is there was just a vibe that I was getting from him, from the way that he kept sort of like stopping and regarding Daniel in this way that felt really, I don't want to say flirtatious because that's not right. It felt more like he was evaluating Daniel in the way that you evaluate somebody that you are starting to grow interested in. It doesn't come across obviously at all. I don't think that there is anything like, a significant glance. There's no body language. This feels very much like what happens as my point of reference, really, because I'll go with like physical attraction right away when I'm like meeting somebody. And I oftentimes like, somebody's personality definitely influences how attractive I find them by a huge amount. But I can be sort of, and I think we're all guilty of this. If I find somebody attractive, a lot of times I will skew the data to match my attraction to them so that they seem like they are better or nicer than they are, because I want them to be an option. And what I feel like was going on with Achadi and Daniel is that Achadi like was attracted to Daniel, did not show it, is not showing it, but shelved it instead and was just kind of like, yeah, but he's a Corellian. I'm not interested. And then began to realize, oh shit, this guy actually is a decent human being. This guy actually like, is respectful of our customs and is trying to learn. This guy will listen to me. This is constantly coming up in their interactions, is like both how much Achadi is surprised at the attitude that Daniel takes about a lot of things. And also for his part, Daniel being like pleasantly surprised at how kind Achadi is to his slaves. This is one of those things that's really, really tough to write, because when you're like me and you just have this sort of like gut reaction to the depiction of slavery in a story, I can't really get past people owning slaves, whether that is a cultural reality or not. It's just difficult for me to be like, well, he has slaves, but he's a good person. I don't know that I can ever believe that about somebody. I just, we see that he's kind to them, but like, it would be kind, if they fucking weren't slaves. And, I guess he can't live in this society and not have them at his rank, but you could leave. If, if this bothers you enough, that I think is really what it is. Obviously, it doesn't bother him. He wants to treat them well, and he cares about like being a decent master. But the concept of owning slaves is not repugnant to him in principle. And that's the thing that I have a hard time with, is like, you could choose to leave not Kirelia, Sachaka, and bring your slaves with you to wherever you go, and then free them. And that way, it's not even like, oh, I'm just going to flood, like put these poor unemployed slaves on the market where they have to find a job. No, you could bring them somewhere and turn them into like employees of yours that you are paying, that you're compensating for their time and work, but who are free, and give them an opportunity. And no, you're not fixing the whole slavery problem in Sachaka. I'm not expecting any one person to do that, but you're doing the most that you can within your sphere of influence and control as somebody with a great deal of privilege. And that's really the key, is that this is a man who has a lot of resources at his disposal, clearly. And I just want him to use them. Maybe that's where the story is going, that he is going to do something like that eventually and, you know, do what he can to break away from this whole thing. Because I feel that the story is kind of setting up that Daniel and Tayend are going to split up, and that Daniel is going to begin to enter into a relationship with Achadi. Maybe it's like overt, maybe not. But for all I know, my hangups here are going to be dealt with, is what I'm saying. So I don't want to get too mired in my complaints, because we'll see where things lead. But I just wanted to register that the author making it a point to say how kind Achadi is to his slaves is one of those things that I feel like is supposed to land better than it does for me, and made me immediately kind of bristle in this way that was like, I'm not going to fall for it kind of attitude. But anyway, so let's see, after one night at the old Ashaki's home, Achadi and Daniel traveled northward for half a day, then stopped at the estate of Achadi's cousin, Ashaki Tanucha. Though not much younger than the previous host, Tanucha was clearly a far wealthier and more sociable man. His much younger wife, in her middle years, only appeared at dinner and was otherwise busy looking after their 7 children, including 5 boys. Okay, let's all agree. That's too many. I feel like that's like a stance that we should all be able to take. And I don't care if you grew up in a family with more kids. I feel like especially if you grew up in a family with as many or more kids, you should know that this is absolutely too many. And I love the conversation that follows, because this is a really compelling, to me at least, difference between the ways in which Kirelia and Sachaka operate. So Achadi says that he thinks that it's irresponsible to have that many sons, because only one of them can inherit. And, for the daughters, they're going to be married off. Like, that's just, women are just sort of useless in that way. But the sons, it's even worse, because since only one can inherit, they're not going to have any land, and they are not going to have independence, because everything that they have will be reliant on their older brother. And he says this is how Ichani came to be. They rebel against their whole country. It is better that younger sons are not trained in magic, but it is rare for a parent who loves his child to withhold that knowledge, since it means the younger son will have low status. And Daniel says, younger sons are more likely to become magicians in Kirelia. Magicians are not supposed to involve themselves in politics, and it's considered better if the son destined to become the head of the family is the one with political influence. And Achadi's like, that makes more sense, and that way everybody gets like their chance at power. With an asterisk, every male. I find it really, like, I feel like this has been talked about, but I never really stopped to think about how in Kirelia magicians are not supposed to involve themselves in politics. And, we've talked before about the reveal of the king not being a magician. It's not even really a reveal. I think that we knew that. But when you're faced with the reality of the king not knowing how the magicians operate, it kind of unnerved me a little bit to think about like the vulnerability of that. And at the same time, as much as it says they're not supposed to involve themselves in politics, I don't know how you keep that from happening. Like a family, like there are just so many strings that can be pulled. And I feel like there's the social expectation of no direct influence. And then there's the reality of like, my older brother is in the political sphere and I'm a magician and I want XY. So I'll tell my brother to present this idea. And it's just that sort of, that danger that's always there whenever you're dealing with power and people with vested interests and outcomes and lobbying and having access. So as much as like Daniel's option is obviously better than what S'Chaka is working with, it's certainly not like the issue that we're talking about here that it's better than is the idea of inheritance and dealing with many sons. But there's also like another potential pitfall of that. So nothing is perfect. Honestly, the idea of inheritance is really tough. It's the kind of thing that nobody's ever really come up with like a better way of doing things. So I don't have like a suggestion for how to improve, except for obviously split everything evenly, which you can't do. If it's a house, somebody has to get it has to be in their name. But I just really feel bad when there's like a family that has so much, and yet there are still going to be people that are left out in the cold in the end. Like, that just seems like a real waste. The chapter starts with the mention of how this Achani is better, is wealthier, and just in general has more to offer than they usually do. And I said Achani, but he's not an Achani. Sorry. Ashaki. I just, if you have that much, there shouldn't be people left totally dependent on one individual for their livelihoods. So that's just real flaw. So they are traveling together. They visit the library, and I love that it's disappointingly small and neglected. And I really like this guy is described as being very social. So it lines up if maybe he is just much more invested in, entertaining people, that something like a library that's introspective is not used as much. And they stay there for 2 days, and Daniel asks Achadi when they are going to keep moving. And Achadi says it depends on the traders, to which Daniel's like, wait, do you mean that we're just going to sit here and wait for them to bring Lorcan and Tyvara to us? And I was really shocked by this, as is he. It didn't even occur to me that Achadi was going to approach it this way. But Daniel is just like, I'm sorry, but I don't see it for them coming to us. I think they're going to lead us with little clues so that eventually we come across them, because they obviously like want us to notice what's happening. We already have been fed information. So I don't know. They haven't told us to stay where we are. I feel like we need to just keep on the road. And this is when Achadi says, I'm growing very fond of you, Ambassador Daniel. You have a unique mind. And I think that was the thing that to me tipped off that he was kind of interested in Daniel. It wasn't even that this is a flirtatious thing to say. It's the kind of thing, it's been very much established to us that Daniel and Achadi are peers in terms of their intellect. And that for somebody like Achadi, saying that Daniel has a unique mind and that he finds how he thinks interesting, that's a big compliment and something that to me seems very meaningful. And there was just a bit of like affection to it that my ears perked up and I was like, And then right after he says that, it says, he turned to one of his slaves, a handsome young man who attended most of his needs. And I'm just like, I bet he does. And indeed, we find out a little bit later that slave is probably like in love with him. And that brings to mind a host of problems with power imbalance and abuse. But what can you do? So they decide that they need to keep going. And Achadi basically, it's not even necessarily that he agrees they need to do that. It's that they don't have a better, like, tactic right now. And it's not going to hurt. If they need to turn around and go back, they can do that. But as of right now, this is something that he can sort of like experiment and ride it out, and we'll see if it works. And it doesn't do any harm for him to indulge Daniel when he has this theory. And as Achadi agrees to leave early the next morning, Daniel tells him thank you. Achadi's frown disappeared and his eyes warmed with good humor. I think I could get to like Kirelian ideas of manners. Then he turned and disappeared through the door to his room. And that was another thing to me, was like, there's that and him saying, I like your way better with the inheritance. And then, him seeming to want to treat his slaves more like servants, that I think we're getting hints of him maybe being able to move to Kirelia and be happy there. I would like it if the two of them would move to, so that they could be together and it wouldn't be such a big deal. But I guess, like, Daniel was practically living with Tyen and everybody just kind of was looking the other way. So it's not like he's in so much danger where he is anymore. Not the way he had been. So then we go to Lorcan, and this is one of those things that I am just gonna have to roll with, that I am not that interested in. I find it funny right now because we are never in Tyvara's head. So I think I know where she's at mentally a little bit, but it's hard to be sure. But Lorcan's attraction to her and the language used is just extremely like, he's looking at her and he thinks about how like, he could appreciate the feminine curve of her jaw and the exotic tilt of her eyes. And I was like, okay. The word exotic is one of those that I find to be very like problematic in its way, because exotic always means not white Western. And so it's an extremely Eurocentric or American centric. Is it Americentric word? And for him to call her exotic when he's like in her country and what she looks like is the norm for people. It's very him not like thinking. And basically him being as attracted to her as he is, and to the point where it feels like he's like genuinely growing a little bit of a crush on her. I am fine with that in theory, but I don't really care about Lorcan's fine. He's a harmless dude. I don't dislike him, but I don't really feel a lot of fizzing of chemistry between the two of them. And I didn't feel the chemistry between Sonea and what's his face either. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe this writer doesn't write romance very well. I think that might be her major weakness, is giving people enough that it feels like there's really something drawing them to each other. I just don't love any of the relationships in this. The one relationship that I got into was Tyen and Daniel, because I wanted there to be like a gay couple that got to be happy. It was much more of an investment in the theory of it than really practically caring too much about what happened with them. So that wasn't so much about there's definitely chemistry with the two of them, but it feels much more like chemistry because it's forbidden and they're each not sure if they're seeing or feeling what the other one is seeing and feeling. And that is where the tension is for me that I enjoy. And that could be where, like, I'm kind of feeling more invested in Achadi and Daniel at this point. But as far as these two, later on, there's like a moment where he notices Tyvara seeming to like, she is looking at her friend and he thinks that maybe she's worried that her friend is going to betray them. And then later he looks and she's laughed and that expression is gone. And I kind of think that maybe she's a little bit worried that he's going to grow interested in her friend. There's a low level jealousy there. And I'm just like, I guess. So yeah, she has fallen asleep when she was supposed to be like keeping watch, and she's been refusing to share the watch with him. And he knows that he can heal himself with magic so that he doesn't get tired, and she can't. But he doesn't want to say that to her because if you recall, part of the vendetta against him was because his father refused to teach healing magic. So he feels like that would be tacky, which honestly it would. Like, he's right. I respect that he has the foresight to realize how that will come across. So he says that he's going to take a look around once they wake up because, like, he wakes up, she didn't want to share the watch. Her, like, protective bubble that she has created with magic around the two of them to keep them warm has broken because she's asleep. And he creates one to replace it. And then when she wakes, he sort of pulls his in so she doesn't notice that he did it. And he gets up, asks if he can look around because there's like some ruins. And she says just stay away from the road because she thinks that that's where they need to worry. But there's a woman here already. And he immediately puts up a shield. And it turns out to be a very good move because this woman tries to attack him immediately. And her name is Rasha. And she is here to kill Lorcan, despite what the queen has said. She has no right to tell us we cannot have our revenge. And Tyvara says to her, Ishira was the first to die. And the woman says to her, you don't know what it's like to lose a child. Because Tyvara says, she was my playmate. Do you think I didn't miss her? Do you think I didn't grieve? So obviously she's like talking about her daughter who was Tyvara's friend. When she says she was one of the first to die, I'm not sure first of what. I feel like I'm missing something here. But Tyvara says, I would consider the queen an example of how to live with loss, not those who would murder someone else's child for their parents' mistakes or crimes. And Rasha basically does the, like, well, it's great if you can be that forgiving. I'm not capable of that kind of line, which on the one hand, I find to be it's one of those things where you're basically like telling on yourself that you're like, I would like to be a better person and I know how, but I'm going to basically say that it's out of my hands that I am not that good. It's sort of like trying to pass off the responsibility of the work it takes to forgive somebody by saying that it's like a quirk of your personality, whether you're lucky enough to be able to forgive. And it's just sloughing off the responsibility of your actions. It's just doing it in a way that sounds a little bit more legit than it is. So she says to Tyvara to let me have him. And Tyvara is like, yeah, okay, let me do that. And then what do you do to me? I'm not an idiot. And she says, you'll come back to Sanctuary with me. All traitors need to know that the queen would rather one of our own died than the son of the man who killed her daughter. And then someone chimes in, actually, the queen would rather people obeyed her orders. Then nobody would get killed. It's quite a reasonable order and good for everybody. And that's really the thing. Like, she's over here trying to be like, yeah, and then she'll know that the queen favors him over her own people. And it's like, no, you fucking went against her. She was killed because she was carrying out an illegal assassination. So you don't get to fucking sit on your moral high horse here. When y'all were breaking the rule, that's your own fucking fault. And trying to be like, see what she allows? No, that's the punishment you get for disobeying the queen, which is treason. And I know y'all are called the traitors, but I didn't think this was what you had in mind. So this girl who has just stepped out is named Cery. And Cery is adorable and honestly such a breath of fresh air. I feel like this book is filled with people who take themselves very seriously this time around. And there aren't like the lighter moments that are needed. And Cery is just really crucial here. I wish that there was like, everybody is so dignified. Even fucking Cery and Goal are serious enough. And their jokes are like cynical and burdened enough that it doesn't feel like a relief when we're with them. I want there to be somebody who's bringing some light and personality into everything, you know? So Cery jumps in and says, I have fresh, shiny orders from the queen. Lord Lorcan is not to be harmed. Tyvara is to be brought to sanctuary to be put on trial for the murder of Riva. Since I outrank you to Rasha, this little task falls to me. You had better run along before your master realizes you're gone and sends a whipping party after you. And Rasha leaves, but it's clear, you know, she's got some backup. She had some friends with her, and Cery got rid of them for now, but she's clearly like supported by people. And this is not the last that we are going to see of her. I am hoping that we get to see the trial, Tyvara's trial. I would like to know how that works in their culture. And also, later on, oh my God, I was about to call him Lyndon. Lorcan. Lyndon is the character from the book I was just covering last hour. Lorcan notes the fact that she says, I outrank you. So he's like, the point of the traitors was that everybody was supposed to be an equal. But now they have ranks, they have a queen, like obviously things didn't go the way that they were meant to go. And that's so frequently the thing when you have like a, what is supposed to be like a commune and it gets big enough. I mean, they are a thriving community at this point, and that's going to be a tricky thing once you get past everybody absolutely having to work together in order to survive, and you get into the comfort and power that comes with being a little bit more stable. That is going to lead to corruption and self-interest and, you know, all kinds of personality clashes. Okay, so Cery is asking Tyvara, is it true that you killed Riva? And Tyvara is honest with her and says if there had been a way to handle it that I didn't have to kill her, I would have. But she had almost like started on killing him. Like it was going to be no turning back. And Cery says that Riva was a troublemaker and that out of everybody, she was the most likely to get hurt by doing some stupid shit. So that's interesting. And I'm wondering if that's going to be a point in Tyvara's favor during her trial. How well known is it that Riva was a troublemaker? Is that an opinion shared by multiple other people? So Lorcan introduces himself and says, honored to meet you, Cery of the Traitors. And this starts a long, like, kind of low-level flirtation between her and him, where she is just so delighted by his exceedingly good manners, which he's, of course, exaggerating because he's a captive and he's trying to stay on everyone's good side. And I find this to be actually amusing, just how she keeps talking about how, like, careful he is and how diplomatic he is. And when she asks him if he's going to teach them healing, Tyvara interrupts and says, we'll discuss that when we get there. And Cery says, I'm sure you will. Of course, that's not what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to be returned to Arvis. We're certainly not meant to bring you back to our secret home. I'll have to get permission for that, and that'll take 6 or 7 days. We can shorten that by meeting Speaker Savara at the Tanner's huts. If you still want to come to Sanctuary, you'll have to talk her into taking you. Don't make promises. She's very careful to be like, you should be charming, and you should get her to see you as a reasonable person who is open to conversation. But don't promise that you will do anything or that you won't, we regard absolute statements like that with suspicion. And that's an interesting point of view to take. And that's something that I can also be sort of wary of, only because I am very lawyer-minded about certain things. And when people make a distinct promise, my immediate reaction is to wonder what loopholes they could take advantage of if they felt like it. What in that promise has left room for them to do something else. And that's not even necessarily like they're going into this promise with the intent of fucking me over and they're leaving loopholes. It's more like if you are up against a wall and you've made this promise, but you don't really want to do it, you may find a way out of it. So this promise doesn't necessarily mean anything. If I don't know all of the possible ways out, that you could take. And so, anyway, what I'm saying is this suspicion of promises, I had never really had it pointed out, being suspicious of them as a concept. And it really rang true to me. That's relatable. And I don't really love the fact that I think like a Sachakin, because they seem to, a lot of them, just be very cynical. So they can take a cart to get to where they're going instead of having to walk. And we see a little bit later that it's this big bale of hay that's it's bales of hay that are stacked into what looks like a pile, but is actually hollow. And they are inside there hidden so that it just looks like a cart full of hay going by. And I thought that was kind of a neat idea. So we have then the Goal and Cery thing. And it turns out that Cery's daughter asked for the meeting. He's very worried because she asked that maybe something terrible has happened. And that's sort of the attitude people in these books have in general. Whenever somebody wants to talk to them, they're like, oh shit, what? And honestly, that's valid because that seems to be the case, that something has gone wrong. So her name is Anyi, and he walks through the door, and she is sitting in the little inn room in the same position that he had been in last time he was there, is the way it's written. And I like that it's either there are multiple ways this could be read. It could be he had been in a certain position because that's the power play and she's trying to be the powerful one, so she's imitating him. It could be that she has an unconscious affectation of copying her father, and it's not even an affectation. People do that just without even realizing it. They pick up on behaviors and habits and quirks of character. And so it could be seen as that. It could be seen as her mocking him a little bit and being like, I remember what you were doing and how you sat and everything, because you are very predictable and a little goofy. So I'm going to make fun of it right now. It could be all kinds of things. So he's, first of all, relieved to see that she's okay. And she wants to know whether or not he has any luck in catching the murderer. And he has to confess that he thinks he may have, but he won't be sure until he actually catches them. And she says, immediately jumps to the next thing. Why have you brazier houses open in Northside? And Cery's like, I haven't. And she's immediately worried at the fact that he doesn't know this has happened in his territory. And he says that he will shut them down. And that she asks if he'll do it in person or not. And he says he probably won't, but why not? And she tells him this story. One opened next to where I was staying. It's why I'm not staying there now. Nasty people. I heard them talking to the previous owner. The walls are pretty thin, so it wasn't hard to listen in. They told the man they were going to take his house and shop. They said if he told anyone, they'd do things to him and his family. There was a woman with a strange accent, nothing I've ever heard before. She said something, and then the bootmaker yelled. When his wife got home after they'd gone, I heard him telling her what happened. He said they'd hurt him with magic. Do you think that's possible, or did they trick him? And I love that that's how her mind works. She asks, she's not assuming that this guy is in a position to even know. So she's not taking him at his word. It's possible they tricked him. And it's a good thought. I had never really thought about anybody perhaps faking magic, but I mean, I could see that being an extremely useful trick and getting people to think that you're a magician. Now, we've seen her, so I am confident that he wasn't tricked, but it's an interesting idea and something that never occurred to me. So let's see. So he asks, okay, so if you're not staying there, did you get another hiding place? She says, no, I had a few, but they've all been spoiled. You're doing okay from the look of it. In a way that I kind of thought was her angling for him to take care of her or give her money. But it turns out she isn't going to take money, just sheer cash, because she is more anxious than anything for something to actually do to get the job done. So, Cery's immediate resistance to her suggestion that she be able to help is due to her being his daughter and him, being worried that her hovering around him when he's attracting so much deadly attention is a bad idea. But she's like, I don't care if I'm in danger either way. And if I'm just hiding, I may as well be in jail. If I'm just sitting hoping that I don't get found, come on, that's no way to live. Give me a goal. I can help you. And I respect that. I am a person of action myself. There is nothing worse than being in a situation where you are powerless to do anything to help yourself. It is the worst. So yeah, I'm not mad at her for trying to resist that. She says basically that she can be Cery's bodyguard because Goal is getting old and slow. And I love Goal being first of all, spluttering with indignation when she first says this. And then when Cery's like, all right, prove how slow and old he is. How it says Goal's look of hurt and dismay changed to wariness as she turned to face him. Aw, don't be hurt or dismayed, Goal. You know that he's just trying to humor his daughter for a second. He knows you are going to pull this out. I don't think he would have asked you to do it if he wasn't positive you would beat her. And then we get a bit of an analysis of her fighting style and how she is circling Goal, which is a bad move because if she's meant to be her dad's bodyguard, she should stay between him and the assailant, but she's not doing that. And then a mention of the way that she rushes him when she should be letting him make the first move. And I liked these little details being mentioned. And then, Goal just immediately dodges her knife, catches her arm, gets her on the floor with her arm twisted up, and Cery is able to take her knife. And it's just a very, it's not that she's not fast. It's not that she's useless. It's just Goal's been doing this a minute. He's dealt with little shits like her before. And I like her getting put in her place a little bit. I would have felt a way if good old Goal that we've gotten to know was shown up by somebody who just came out of fucking nowhere, But then there's like these ongoing old jokes, which I found funny. Her dad says, Gull's not old. He's close to the same age as me. Anya's eyebrows rose. If you think that means he's not old, then you really do need a new bodyguard. So then we go to Healer Nikia. And Healer Nikia is with Sonea, who is trying to heal somebody who's addicted to Rowett. And it's another person that Sonea has like managed to heal the actual body, but the Rowett craving has not gone away. And she's just very frustrated by it. Cery has come to visit her at the clinic, which is something that he doesn't really do unless it's an emergency. So when she hears he's there, she's irritated and worried. And he asks her, how do you feel about another thief helping us find the rogue? Farron's successor, his name is Skellin. I said before that I don't really trust Skellin. And I am doubling down on that here. There is just something about the whole way things are working between him and Cery that I don't trust. Cery is not getting anything out of the relationship. Right now, Cery is feeding Skellin information on the assumption that Skellin wants the same thing as him, which is to catch this person. And there is no real reason to believe that right now. Like, this could be something that Skellin put in place. And he's trying to keep tabs on how much Cery has figured out. And that's all, you know? And plus, the part of the deal is that Skellin will be able to help me track her down in exchange for meeting you. And I don't know what this could be, but I feel like wanting to meet Sonea is a loaded desire. He's being like, oh, he just wants to meet the legend. And I'm like, you can't possibly believe that's all, can you? Like, Sonea even says, I hope that he doesn't think I could be useful to him, because I'm not going to fucking work with that guy. That's not how any of this goes. And, you know, Cery's immediate reaction is, oh, he's absolutely not, like, he doesn't believe that you are going to work with him. He may fantasize about how great it would be if you were able to do X, Y, and Z. But, you know, he has no illusions about it. But Cery, you have to assume if he wants to meet Sonea, it can't just be for like fanboying. I'm just wanting Cery to be more suspicious here than he seems to be. So anyway, Cery says she did a favor for a rot seller that set up shop in my area until I put a stop to it. Skellin controls most of the trade, so I'm hoping that he can trace the thief we're working with. The thief who is maybe the main source of Rowett. And again, if he is like the suggestion that I guess he's working on is Skellin doesn't want anybody else cutting into his Rowett business. But all I can think is that if she's in on Rowett too, then they are working together. Later on, he tells Skellin about the conversation that his daughter overheard. And Skellin is angry about it. And he plays it off as being angry that somebody's muscling in on his turf. I could easily see that as anger that she was overheard. That he is irritated. Somebody found out. And Cery tells him that his source is a washerwoman. And I'm going to keep my eyes open for any washerwomen that turn up dead, because I feel like there's something up with Skellin. I'm just saying, I don't see him being this much of a character and turning out to not be important in some way. And I feel like that has to be as a villain. Probably not even fully like aware of who he's working with. You know, I have a feeling that whoever this thief hunter is, Skellin is working with them, but not appreciating the danger of doing so. We'll see. So Sonea agrees for Cery to tell Skellin what they have found out so far. And we see that conversation a little bit later, and it is very brief. And there's even a comment from Cery, like mentally, about how he feels like he always gets himself so hyped up for these meetings, and then they're super short and kind of anticlimactic. And his daughter comes out and like starts talking to him and asks him if he has gotten any more information. And then she shares with him about how she does not like Rowett because she apparently, when she told her dad about the Rowett that was being sold, she didn't even totally, like, I thought she was telling him because she knew that he was anti-Rowett. But it turns out she was asking, why did you let them? Looking for a genuine answer to why, not because she's not putting him on the spot to be like, I can't believe you did this. She's trying to sense what her father's attitude is toward the drug itself. And we wind up finding out that that is based on she had a boyfriend and he was supposed to be helping her out and protecting her. And they had a decent amount of money that they should have been able to live on and hide with pretty well. And it started to just like vanish. And eventually he turned up while she was away, and she like got home and heard him talking with these people in their house because he had been about to give her up in exchange for either Rowett or money for Rowett. And I really liked that little detail of her like trying to suss out her father's like intentions regarding this drug, because he's, you know, part of the underworld. He is a criminal. She would understand, and I don't say like, but I say understand, if he were on the side of it as a business proposal. But his attitude is that Rowett is in general bad for business because it is bad for society, and sort of says that Rowett like erases people's interest in doing anything to make their lives better, which means that they are not out here striving and, you know, trying to take out loans or work so that they can pay back their loans. So it just sort of deadens everything. So I liked that as like a very logical response. I don't think it's entirely true. I think that Cery also has a bit of an emotional, like, this is a fucked up thing. But he has to give her an answer that sounds less emotional and also prove, I think, that he isn't judgmental necessarily of the people who take it. It seems like he's putting the blame squarely on people who are bringing it into the city. And he gets why they are doing it as a money-making machine, but he just thinks it's short-sighted. So, I don't know. I just like that conversation between the two of them. I liked her having firsthand experience with being betrayed by somebody that she cared about, because that gives me some insight that she's no fool anymore, at least. Like, she has seen firsthand that you can be betrayed by somebody that you really care about and trust. And you need a dash of that old cynicism in there, man, when you're living on these streets. So then we go to Daniel and him exploring these ruins, which I am assuming are the ruins that we had just seen Lorcan and Tyvara, sorry. And Daniel is kind of like on this ridge where he can see down to the little site where they've laid out this like picnic and they're taking a break, because they are going to be met up with by this little delegation. And as he's up there, he sees the slave, the handsome slave, come up and offer a knife to Achadi, and watches as Achadi does the, you know, the black magic ritual and takes some power from him. And I thought Daniel was going to be kind of horrified, but instead he was like a bit pumped at getting to actually see this. And I didn't really think about the fact that he had never witnessed it before, but that was something that like they kept pretty secret. Like Sonea and Acheron, they didn't do that shit publicly, so I guess that makes sense. And it hadn't involved any death either. You know, he just takes a little bit of power and lets his slave keep doing his thing. And then eventually the slave stands and gets up really close, and Achadi puts his hand on the side of the kid's face and is just like, gives him a shake of his head like, not now, honey. And they kiss very softly. And Daniel all of a sudden is like, oh shit, no way. And turns away because he knows that the next impulse is that the two guys are going to look around to see if anybody noticed. So he's like making sure that he's not looking in their direction when they turn. And then he asks himself, like, do men of similar rank is that allowed, or is this just because it's a slave that this is allowed? And I don't know. I am interested in seeing the developments between the two of them, but I do wish that Daniel had a little bit more of the lightness that he used to, because he was the kind of source of like comedy. I hate to say even comedy, but he had like the little japes, and he's extremely focused and serious. And I like that, but I want more of like, I don't know, finding the amusement in things, you know? So let's see. I only have like 5 minutes left. I pretty much talked about them riding in the cart that looks like a haystack, and Cery like quizzing Lorcan about what it's like to be at the guild. And eventually Tyvara interrupts and is like, well, if you're going to keep asking him questions, he should get to ask you questions. But he tries to be as diplomatic as he can in asking, because his immediate thing is, I want to ask you how you block mind reading. But he knows that's like probably a very closely guarded secret, and he's not going to mess with that. So instead he asks about the Store Stone, and rightfully Cery's like, I mean, the name says it. I don't really know what you want from me. But she says that they were so rare that they were once given names and their histories were recorded as if they were people, which is actually really neat. I like that idea a lot. It's probably over 1,000 years since the last one existed. And he mentions like that journal entry that he came across. And she's wondering whether or not, I think she's the one who says, I wonder if that was how Imardin was destroyed. But yeah, I like this conversation because this is when Tyvara is kind of like, what are you doing, Cery? Stop it. Like, she's a little bit protective of Lorcan in a way that's clearly unexpected to both of them. Meanwhile, Lorcan is thinking about the Bloodstone and how he really wants to get in contact with his mom or with Daniel, and he hasn't had any chance to use it. He hasn't been alone, at all. So let's see. I'm trying to see. Oh yeah, I talked about chapter 24 and the whole thing with the meetup with Skellin, and then we have this is something that I assume is going to be important, but right now I do not care. There is a little bit of a trial with this student who had been brought in by a smuggler connected to her family in some distant way, that he used to do them like favors before they realized just how shady he actually was. So he apparently has a bit of leverage over her and her family. And he was smuggling something, and this really heavy box broke a dude's leg, and he went and got a magician that could heal to help his friend because he needs to be able to fucking smuggle. And she helped the guy. And now she could be in trouble because she helped a smuggler. And they just had this whole thing about having relationships with people of ill repute. And she is rightfully let off the hook because it's just not like, she's sort of like, I would have helped him either way. I got brought there to help, yes, but the man had his leg broken. That was just the right thing to do. And meanwhile, the teacher who like turned her in, they are also going to pains to let him know that like, and let everyone know that despite the fact that they found she had not done anything wrong, he did the right thing by letting them know. And I like that they make a point of that, because it could be something that, you know, he winds up feeling really guilty that he brought it up and then not wanting to say something if another thing goes down later. And eventually we have the scene where Daniel is traveling with Achadi, and they are with this like other dude who's from this like land that I don't feel we've heard mentioned before. He's called like Gray, and I mean gray in color. His name is Un. And he's part of like this nomadic tribe, but they're traveling, and Daniel and Achadi are sort of like deciding whether or not they should move on or what they should do. And Un comes over and tells them they're in the cart, and then immediately like turns and walks away. And I don't know how he knows that. He says a slave told me, but like is this another purposefully left clue? I'm assuming it is, because that's like what Achadi says. But it's so abrupt, you know. Part of me is like, is Un telling the truth that a slave told him? Did he already know? And that's how the chapter ends. So I said that I was also covering the Messenger's News, chapter 25. I was mistaken. I only did 22, 23, 24. Forgive me, because that was like just 50 pages. But yeah, anyway, thank you very much again to Ashleigh for commissioning this. I am very eager to see how this one ends, because I don't really know where we're going with any of this. And also, Ashleigh, let me know how many more books are in this series, because this is Traitor Spy Trilogy, book 1, but this is part of, you know, a series that has more than one trilogy in it. So in total, how many like of the books set in Karelia are there? How many trilogies are there? Because then the book previous to this one wasn't part of a trilogy at all. So I'm just curious about how many there are and where the story could go and how much time it spans. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys very much for listening, and I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.